This screencast gives a very brief introduction to cascading style sheets, or CSS. In previous screencasts, we've already seen how we can view the source of a page served to Firefox, and we've seen that we can turn on display element information and move its little window out of the way, so that when we hover over different elements, we can see not only what type of element tag it is, but we can also see whether it has an ID or class attribute. Remember that .title means an H1 heading whose class attribute has the value title, and table #movies is a table whose ID attribute has the value movies. Now, how is this information used by cascading style sheets to style the page? If we go back to view source, take a look at this very special HTML element, the link element. A link element with a rel equals style sheet attribute says, load a style sheet from this URL, given by the href element, and use the information in that style sheet to control the visual display of this page. Now, conveniently, since Firefox is so developer-friendly, we can actually just click right on this URI, and we can be taken directly to the style sheet, which, by the way, exactly matches what you'll find in your Rails directory under app/assets/stylesheets/application.css. So let's take a look at what's going on in the style sheet. Each piece of the style sheet consists of a selector, which names some part of the document, and a collection of visual attributes to apply to any part of the document matching that selector. Now, there's 4 different ways that selectors can match different elements. The simplest one is based on the HTML tag. For example, all movies is just an H1 tag, and if we look in the styling information, it says that H1 tags should be styled with a maroon-colored font, an italic size, and so forth. Now, that's going to match every H1 in the document, so there are various ways to make the match much more specific. Going back for another example, this large block of content that comprises the majority of the actual content on the page is in a div element whose ID is main, as you can see, once again, from the Web Developer information bar. Now, div is a kind of HTML tag that doesn't actually cause anything to be drawn on the screen, but rather demarcates a logical part of a document. In this case, what it demarcates is the main body of the page as distinct from this attractive rotten potatoes bright orange header we have up here. So, how is this div supposed to be styled? Well, if we look in the CSS information, we can see that there's a selector for a div whose ID is main. Notice how the # notation is used to specify only a div whose ID is main is going to be styled this way. And you can see that one of the effects is that, unlike the rotten potatoes header, which extends all the way to the edge of the page, the main body of the page is going to have 20 pixels of padding on either side. So that's the second way to specify parts of the page. A third way is to use the class attribute. So we just saw how to use the ID attribute. Here is an H1 element whose class attribute has the value title. Going back to our CSS, we can see that an H1 with the class attribute title is going to be styled according to these instructions. In particular, it's a different color, white instead of maroon, and it has this lovely gold border on the bottom. So this illustrates one important point. We already had some styling information for generic H1 elements, but whenever there's multiple matches for a particular element, the most specific one wins. So H1 with a title class is more specific than H1 in general. That's why the H1.title matched this element up here. The last way is we can do it by nesting. For example, let's take a look down here where we see a table whose ID is movies, inside of which is nested a th element. Here's another example, a table whose ID is movies, inside of which is nested a th, or a table whose ID is movies, inside of which is nested a td. And as you can see from the information bar, those correspond to these 2 pieces of the table respectively. Nesting is important because if we had a different table that did not match having the ID of movies, then any THs or TDs embedded in that table wouldn't match the selector. So nesting gives us an even more specific way, along with the possible use of ID or class attributes, to style different parts of the page using different visual appearance attributes.